It wasn't until 1938 a little group of English writers, H.G. Wells, and under the chairmanship of H.G. Wells, came up with the idea of rights based on human dignity and decided to draft a universal declaration of human rights that would actually be enforceable. They were an extraordinary group led by H.G. Wells. J.B. Priestley was there. A.A. Milne would motor up from Pooh Corner to add his to the draft. And instead of those messianic natural law preambles of the French and American declarations, they replaced it with the simple statement in the preamble: since a man comes into this world through no fault of his own, he is in justice entitled, they went on, without distinction of race or colour, to nourishment, housing, covering, medical care and attention sufficient to realise his full possibilities of physical and mental development, and to keep him in a state of health from his birth to his death. And so it went on, this marvellous draft that was published as a Penguin special in homely, if occasionally dated style, promising there shall be no secret dossiers in any administrative department. A man's private house or apartment or reasonably limited garden enclosure shall be his castle. No man shall be subjected to torture, beating, or any other bodily punishment, or to imprisonment with such an excess of silence, noise, light, or darkness as to cause mental suffering, or in infected, verminous, or otherwise insanitary quarters. Well, that was the first declaration, modern declaration of human rights. It was published, I don't know, is this working? Published as a Penguin special on the eve of war, and it immediately went into 30 languages, sold hundreds of thousands of copies. H.G. Wells on the New World Order, the rights of man. And the British Foreign Office was so enraptured with it that they translated it into German, and they dropped it on the SS tanks as they swept across France. They didn't stop to read it, but the person who did was H.G. Wells' friend and admirer Franklin D. Roosevelt, and it inspired his For Freedoms speech after Pearl Harbor, that what we're fighting for is a world for human rights, four freedoms: freedom of speech and religion, freedom from want and fear. And he set it off to the State Department, and it became the basis of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights after the war. Of course, until this time, there had been no international law that entitled you to do anything to political or military leaders who mass murdered their own people. That had been the case in Armenia in 1915, when the Young Turks, when they finished demolishing the Australians of Gallipoli, turned to exterminate over half their Armenian population. And there was no way of stopping or punishing that. The British tried to put them on trial at Malta, and it didn't. They had to be released. And Hitler, of course, famously or infamously said to his generals on the eve of their invasion of Poland, urging them to show no mercy, "Who now remembers the Armenians?" One person who did was a Polish lawyer, Raphael Lemkin, who in the 30s invented the crime of genocide as an international law crime to punish those who exterminated or tried to exterminate a particular race within their society. But he got nowhere until after the war. And then there was the first big step in making rights, the rights that Wells and Priestley and Huxley and Milne had argued had to be enforceable, was to put the Nazi leaders on trial. Churchill, however, was totally opposed to this. He didn't want Hitler using the dock as a stoke box. He insisted, he drew up a list of 75 top Nazis. He said they should be given 6 hours to say their prayers after their arrest, and then they should be shot. Truman, who'd taken over from Roosevelt, and his great lawyer advisor Jackson, Robert Jackson, wrote a wonderful letter to Churchill saying that summary execution of the Nazi leaders would not sit well on the American conscience or be remembered by our children with pride. They had to be tried and tried at Nuremberg. So there was a complete deadlock over whether Nuremberg should go ahead. And it was a deadlock that, of course, was broken only by the third ally, Joe Stalin, who loved show trials as long as everyone got shot in the end. And so we got Nuremberg. And Nuremberg was a successful trial. As Robert Jackson, who became the prosecutor, said, it worked because of the Teutonic habit of writing everything down. I had Goering's signature on the night and fog decrees. And so if we look back at sitting as I did in as a United Nations judge in Africa, where we look back with almost nostalgia on Nuremberg, where they had all the evidence. We've got to find our evidence in deductions from mass graves and giving informers special rights. The post-war world, however, was constructed on the transcripts of Nuremberg. It was constructed by the UN Charter in San Francisco at the Paris Peace Conference, and ultimately at the United Nations in 1948. The most important figure of that time, believe it or not, was the Australian Foreign Minister, Dr. Evatt. He bestrode the Paris Peace Conference. He argued first time for a European Court of Human Rights. It came to pass 5 years later as Evatt had envisaged it, and it's now the most important human rights court with judgments that bind 47 countries. He argued for an international criminal court. It's now coming to pass. He argued for and has left people in place in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. People don't realize, I've read the transcripts of the drafting conferences, how the Australian delegation was vital. Many of the sections of the Universal Declaration are the result of Australia, which was able to broker deals between the Soviets and their highly strung puppet states and the Americans and their allies. And for that reason, we get economic and social rights. There was no mention of them initially. It was Colonel Hodgson, Evatt's military lawyer, who said to Eleanor, Roosevelt, who was opposing them, listen, love, your late husband's third right was freedom from want. And so into the Universal Declaration went economic and social rights. I talk, my friend and neighbor in Hampstead is Michael Foote, and he was a young journalist in San Francisco, and he said, look, Evatt was just an incredible presence in constructing the post-war world. He was head and shoulders as a lawyer and as a human being above the American and British representatives. His drafting went into the Charter. Shortly before he died, some years ago, I interviewed Sean McBride, the son of Maud Gonne, Irish foreign minister who brought his mother's hypothetical lover, W.B. Yeats, back from France. He said Evatt was the greatest figure in constructing this, the human rights triptych, the Universal Declaration, the Genocide Convention, and the Geneva Conventions, all that came to pass under Evatt's presidency. Australia was the first country, and it was a little country of 7 million people only in those days, the first country that was elected as a non-permanent member of the Security Council. Mr. Rudd is going to have a great difficulty in 2013. If he succeeds, it will be as a result of some sort of folk memory of the way Doc Evatt worked.